Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 7th of July 2020 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now before we start our today's discussion, we have a small announcement for you. We have been getting a lot of requests to help you prepare for the mains examination. Now starting from today, every week we shall be uploading a question on our Rouse eLearn platform. You can write the answer of the question and submit the same on the platform. Our team will evaluate your answer and we will share the feedback on your answer. The question that we will share with you will be from the DNS only, and you can prepare an answer for such a question shared from the discussion of the DNS of the particular date. At the same time, we would recommend that you should understand how to write the answers for the mains examination, and we also share our approach in terms of how we make the questions that can help you to do much better in the coming mains examination. Now in the description of today's DNS video, we have put the links of the video discussion of our Rouse IS mains test series program. These discussions will help in understanding how we make the questions keeping in mind the trend analysis of the previous year UPSC questions, how questions are formulated keeping in mind the syllabus as well as weightage of the subject, how the current affairs get reflected in the mains questions, and then how to write better answers. So the today's question is privatization of Indian Railways, although a step in the right direction, is not a panacea. Discuss. You are required to write the answer to this particular question in 250 words and the marks allocated to this question is 15. Now all those who would submit the answers by 10th of July will get detailed evaluation and feedback from the Rouse IS teachers. Now this particular topic of privatization of Indian Railways was discussed in the DNS of 3rd of July by Vaibhav sir. You may watch the video and then write the answer of the question. There is a link of the description of the video which will direct you to the discussion on the eLearn platform. From the entire team of Rouse IS, we wish you all the best. Now this particular article appears on page number 4 and is titled as Haryana Cabinet Not for the Draft to Reserve 75% Jobs for the Locals. The article that we are going to discuss here shall be important both from the perspective of GS paper 1 as well as paper 2. Under GS paper 1, it shall be part of the subtopic of regionalism, and in GS paper 2, it shall be part of the topic of governance. Apart from that, this particular topic is also important because a rated question has been asked in UPSC Mains 2016, wherein the question was, what is the basis of regionalism? Is it that the unequal distribution of benefits of the development on the regional basis eventually promotes the regionalism? Substantiate your answer. Now before understanding the background to this particular article, let us first understand as to what do you exactly mean by the term regionalism. See, all people across India need to be proud of their region or the state to which they belong to. For example, people need to be proud of being a Maharashtrian, a Kannadiga, Tamilian, etc. depending upon the state we belong to. Now such kind of loyalty or love towards the region fosters the spirit of brotherhood and bonhomie among the community of people living in a particular region. It fosters a nation building, since unless we are proud of our region or the state, we cannot be proud of being an Indian. Thirdly, if you look at religion as such, religion has emerged as one of the most divisive force within the Indian society, leading to the development of communalism. On the other hand, the love for the region as such acts as a strong unifying factor and brings together people belonging to different religions on a same platform. So in a way, we can see that the love towards a region can keep the divisive forces such as religion away. Now, as long as we believe that our regional interests are not contradictory to the interest of other regions, then it is okay. But what if we start believing that our regional interests are contradictory to the interest of the other regions. Then, such kind of excessive loyalty or love towards a region can lead to the development of regionalism. Now, for example, as long as people are proud of belonging to a particular state, it is okay. But if people believe that their interests per se are different from the interests of the people in other states, then we can call that to be a form of regionalism. Now, one of the best examples of such form of regionalism can be seen with respect to the Kaveri dispute between the state of Karnataka and that of Tamil Nadu. Now, such form of excessive loyalty or love towards a region can be manifested in different forms, such as the boundary dispute between the states, the water disputes between the states, as well as the sons of the soil doctrine. Now, the sons of the soil doctrine basically states that the resources as well as opportunities in a particular state should be available only to the people of that particular state, and it should not be made available to the people from the other states. Now, for example, as part of the Sons of the Soil doctrine, some of the states may stipulate that the employment opportunities would be available only for the local youths and not for the youths from the other states. Now, the problem with respect to regionalism is that in regionalism, people perceive that their interests are contradictory to the interests of the other states or other regions. So this leads to the discrimination of people from other regions in that particular state or in that particular region, and in a way this in turn hinders the national integration. Now, apart from these forms, another form of regionalism that has come into being in recent times is the locals first policy. Now, as part of the locals first policy, some of the state governments have passed a legislation in order to ensure that certain amount of jobs in the private sector are reserved for the local youths. Now, for example, the Andhra Pradesh State Assembly has passed the Andhra Pradesh Employment of Local Candidates in Industries or Factories Act 2019. Under this particular act, 75% of jobs in the private sector have to be reserved for the local youths. It further goes on to say that if the industries are not able to get the youths of the requisite skill set, then the industries have to provide the skill set to the local youths in association with the state government. Similarly, in state of Karnataka, a committee headed by Sarojini Mahishi committee has recommended that certain category of the private sector jobs have to be reserved for the Kannadigas. Similar proposals have been made by other states such as the state of Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, and so on. Now, taking this locals first policy, recently the Haryana cabinet has approved a new ordinance. As per this particular ordinance, 75% of jobs in the private sector shall be reserved for the local youths. Now, according to this particular ordinance approved by the Haryana cabinet, in order to avail the reservation, the youths in Haryana have to furnish the permanent residence proof. Now, as part of this particular video analysis, we'll focus on different dimensions such as what is the need for some of the state government to adopt the local first policy, the implications of the local first policy, whether such kind of policies do they benefit the states or not, and what should be the way forward. Now, with respect to reasons of adoption for the local first policy, the reasons can be broadly categorized as the economic reasons, social reasons, and political reasons. Now, with respect to the economic reasons, according to Economic Survey 2016-17, on an annual basis, the total interstate work-related migration has increased to around 9 million. On an average, people are migrating from the labor surplus states in North India such as UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan to the labor deficient or the industrialized states such as the state of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and so on. Now, most of these migrants are in turn employed in the private sector industries. This has reduced the employment opportunities for the local youths. Secondly, with respect to social reason, over a period of time, there has been improvement in the educational status of the youths. Now, Such an increase in the aspirations of the youths should have been accompanied by creation of more amount of employment opportunities. However, the adoption of the LPG reforms has led to the decline in the public sector jobs. Further, if you look at the amount of job creation within the Indian economy, this has remained quite poor. Now, for example, one of the parameters which is used in order to measure the employment creation is the employment elasticity. Now, the employment elasticity basically measures the increase in the job creation for every 1% increase in the GDP growth rate. Now, if you look at the employment elasticity within the Indian economy, this is hardly around 0.1 to 0.2. This means that for every 1% increase in the GDP growth rate, the employment within the Indian economy has increased only by around 0.1 to 0.2%. So whatever limited jobs are created by the private sector, for such jobs there is huge competition between the local youths and the migrant workers. Apart from that, the influx of migrants into some of the states has led to a perception among certain categories of local population that it would lead to erosion of their language and cultural values. Now, for example, in some of the southern states, there is a strong anti-Hindi movement against the use of Hindi language in various public installations such as metros and so on. Further, we have seen the strong anti-migrant sentiment that is prevailing in Mumbai because of the perception that the majority of jobs in Mumbai are basically taken up by the North Indian migrants. So all of these factors is in turn leading to a strong sons of the soil sentiment among the local population. Now this particular increase in the sons of the soil sentiment among the people is in turn capitalized by some of the political parties as vote bank politics. So some of the political parties are promising to the people that if elected to power, they would provide reservation for the local youths in the private sector jobs. So this is basically considered as a kind of vote bank politics that is played by some of the political parties. Now coming to the implications of such policies. Now the Indian Constitution is based upon the bedrock of equality and fairness, because of which some of the political commentators have expressed an opinion that the local first policy may not stand the legal scrutiny of the Supreme Court. Now, for example, the Article 16 of the Indian Constitution provides that there shall be equality of opportunity for all the citizens in matters related to employment. No citizen shall be discriminated on grounds only of religion, place, caste, sex, descent, place of birth as well as residence. Similarly, Article 14 provides for right to equality. Article 19 provides for the right to practice any profession. So in a way, the locals first policy goes against the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. Further, in order to understand the implications of the local first policy, we need to look at the Supreme Court judgment in the Pradeep Jain versus Union of India case. Now, in this particular case, Supreme Court had given a ruling as to whether the state governments can provide reservation to the local youths in the educational institutions. Now, this is similar to the local first policy wherein the state governments provide for the reservation to the local youths in the public sector. So, the local first policy is for providing employment, whereas this particular case, that is a Pradeep Jain versus Union of India case, was pertaining to the reservation in the educational institutions for the local youths. Now, in this particular case, the Supreme Court observed that the state government provide the necessary financial support to the educational institutions. Since they provide the financial support to the educational institutions, the state governments are entitled to reserve certain category of seats for the local population. But at the same time, the Supreme Court stated that the state government should exercise due caution while formulating such policies. This is so because if the state government formulates such policies, then it can lead to the fragmentation of the country. So here when we say fragmentation of the country, we are not talking about the political fragmentation, rather we are talking about the economic and social fragmentation. So if the state governments come up with a local first policy, then this will prevent the movement of people from one state to another, leading to both economic as well as social fragmentation of India. Now coming to the economic implications, see, first and foremost, we have to raise a very important question as to whether the local first policy, whether it is going to benefit the state or not. Now, in order to answer this question, we know that the ability of a state to attract the private sector investment in turn depends upon the ease of doing business. Now, the imposition of the locals first policy on the private sector entities would lead to increase in the labor cost. Hence, in a way, such a policy would dissuade the private sector investment in a particular state. So we can actually counter argue that the local first policy, rather than benefiting the state, it would end up adversely affecting the state itself. So that is why some of the economists have pointed out that even though the locals first policy may be politically feasible, but economically they do not seem to be feasible, and they go against the economic interests of a particular state. As you all must be aware, the share of the working age population in the age group 20 to 59 in the year 2011, this was around 50%, and it is expected to increase to around 59% by the end of 2041. And beyond 2041, the share of the younger population is set to reduce. So India has a small window of opportunity of the next 2 decades in order to reap the demographic dividend. Now, in order to reap the demographic dividend, we have to understand that different states in India are at different stages of demographic transition. Now, for example, if you look at some of the states such as Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, West Bengal, etc., these states have already reached the peak of their demographic dividend. And in the next 2 decades, the share of the working age population in these states is set to reduce, and the share of the aging population is set to increase. So obviously, in order to continue with their present level of economic growth and development, these states need the surplus labor from the other states such as UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and so on. So if you look at the North Indian states such as UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, etc., these states are yet to reach the peak of their demographic dividend. So these states in a way can support the economic growth and development in other states such as Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and so on. At the same time, we must also realize that the workers working in these states are sending certain percentage of their income back to their families in the North Indian states. So this in a way is in turn promoting economic growth and development of the North Indian states as well. So this free flow of migrants across India is actually win-win-win situation for all the stakeholders. First and foremost, it is benefiting the states which is receiving these migrants. It is benefiting the state from where the migrants are migrating. And thirdly, it is benefiting India as a whole because it is helping us reap the demographic dividend. Now, the locals first policy would put unnecessary barriers with respect to movement of the migrant workers and hence end up adversely affecting all the stakeholders. As far as social implications is concerned, we do note that the local first policy would promote greater regionalism within India. It will hinder the national integration, and as stated by the Supreme Court, it would lead to fragmentation of India as a whole. So now the question arises as to how do you reconcile the contrasting objectives of these two categories of states. Now, first and foremost, if we consider employment creation as a pie, this pie is quite small, and since it is quite small, there is intense competition among the different stakeholders to get more amount of employment opportunities. So as long as we don't increase the share of this particular pie, such kind of tensions and conflicts are bound to arise. So first and foremost, what the state government should essentially do is they have to focus on creating more amount of jobs within the state. So as the creation of jobs within the state increase, they would be able to provide jobs to both the migrants as well as the local youths. And this can possibly be done by carrying out long pending reforms that have hindered the employment creation within the Indian economy. Some of these long pending reforms include the reforms related to the land acquisition, the labor reforms, and so on. Secondly, the state governments have to focus upon imparting the necessary skill set to the local youths. So by providing the necessary skill set to the local youths, the state government would be able to ensure that such local youths are not unemployed. And lastly, the nature of relationship between the different units in a federal government should be guided by the spirit of cooperative and competitive federalism. So in case of India, the relationship between the state government should be based upon the spirit of cooperation and a healthy competition in order to promote the inclusive growth. The locals first policy goes against the spirit of cooperative and the competitive federalism. Hence, the state government should refrain from adopting such policies. Now, these are some of the important aspects which you should know with respect to this particular topic. Now, based upon a video analysis, a main question for your practice here could be: the locals first policy of some of the state governments goes against the spirit of cooperative federalism and lead to the economic and social fragmentation of the country. Discuss. Now, the next article appears on page number 1 and is titled as 1.4 lakh families reach the MG Narega's annual work limit. The article that we are going to discuss here shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS paper 2 governance under the subsection government policies and interventions for the development in various sectors. This article is also important because a rated question has been asked in UPSC Mains 2017 in GS paper 2. The question here was: the poverty alleviation programs in India remain mere showpieces until and unless they are backed by political will. Discuss with reference to the performance of poverty alleviation programs in India. Now let us understand the context in which this particular article has appeared in the newspaper. As you all must be aware, under the MG Narega program, at least one adult member of each and every rural household is guaranteed minimum 100 days of employment. Now the lockdown imposed due to COVID-19 has led to influx of large number of migrants back to the rural areas. Now because there is surplus amount of labor available in the rural areas, almost around 14 lakh families have already reached or used their annual work limit of 100 days in the first 3 months of the financial year itself. Which means going forward, these 1.4 lakh families do not have the guaranteed employment under the MG Narega for the rest of the year. Now, there is a specific provision under the MG Narega. As per this particular provision, if a particular district is affected either by drought or any kind of natural disaster, then such a district can seek extension of the scheme for 150 days. Which means instead of the guaranteed employment for 100 days, the workers would be provided guaranteed employment for 150 days. Now, experts have pointed out that we need to use such a provision in order to provide the employment opportunities to the people in the rural areas. Now, keeping this particular implementation challenge related to MG Narega in mind, let us discuss all the facets related to MG Narega. Now, based upon this discussion of ours, a mains question for your practice here could be: discuss various implementation challenges in the MG Narega. Also suggest some measures in order to ensure the guaranteed reach and outcome of this program. Now coming to the first dimension, that is what factors led to the implementation of the MG Narega. Now prior to the implementation of MG Narega, the government of India used to implement a number of employment generation schemes such as the Integrated Rural Development Program, Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana, and so on. However, there were a number of flaws with respect to these employment generation programs, because of which we had to implement the MG Narega program. Now, some of the flaws in this particular programs were: first and foremost, the people's participation in these programs was quite minimal in nature. Now, for example, the local bodies were not actively involved in the planning of these employment generation programs. Secondly, these programs had poor coverage both in terms of area as well as beneficiaries. Now, according to some of the estimates, these employment generation programs covered only around 5 to 10% of villages in India. Further, these employment generation programs failed to provide for enough amount of employment opportunities for the poor and vulnerable sections such as the women. Apart from that, the amount of funds allocated for the implementation of these programs was quite lower, which was in turn leading to the poor outcomes. So in order to address these problems and to provide for a legal guarantee to work to the people in the rural areas, the government then came up with the MG Narega program. Now in this particular video, we shall not be discussing the basic details of the MG Narega because this has been discussed multiple times in DNS. Further, the basics of MG Narega has also been covered by us in the economic survey video of 2018-19. So those of you who would want to know the basic details of the MG Narega, you can go through this particular economic survey video. Now coming to various benefits of MG Narega. First and foremost, by providing guaranteed employment to the people in the rural areas, MG Narega program has emerged as a major tool in order to reduce the poverty and unemployment in the rural areas. The regular employment of people under MG Narega has led to increase in the income levels, and this increase in the income levels has in turn translated into local multiplier effects, wherein now people are spending money on both health as well as nutrition, leading to improvement in the health outcomes. At the same time, the increase in the income levels in the rural areas has translated into the increase in the consumption expenditure, which is quite vital in order to promote economic growth and development in India. Further, MG Narega provides that 1/3 of the jobs under the MG Narega should be given to women. Hence, by providing employment opportunities to women, it has been able to promote the women empowerment and thus reduce the gender disparity in the rural areas. It has also been able to reduce the distance migration. And lastly and more importantly, it has also led to the creation of durable assets such as the rainwater harvesting structures, the construction of check dams, construction of toilets, roads, etc. So in a way, the MG Narega program implemented in the rural areas has been able to provide the employment opportunities, plus it has also been able to create durable assets in the rural areas, leading to the comprehensive and holistic development. Now, in spite of these benefits associated with the MG Narega, even today the MG Narega faces a number of implementation challenges. Now, these implementation challenges in the MG Narega have been highlighted by the second ARC report, which was published separately on the MG Narega. Apart from that, some of the implementation challenges have also been highlighted by the Office of CAG. Let us look into these implementation challenges one by one. Broadly, the implementation challenges under the MG Narega can be categorized into 4 categories, that is guaranteed reach, guaranteed outcome, the problems related to wages, and the problems related to the governance of MG Narega. Now, with respect to guaranteed reach, we must realize that MG Narega's success is in turn dependent upon its ability to provide the jobs when people need them the most. So, the overall success of the MG Narega depends upon its ability to reduce the gap between the number of households who have applied for the jobs and the number of households who actually got the jobs. So the success of the MG Narega would depend upon reducing the gap between the households who have applied and the households who have actually got the jobs. So in order to ensure such a guaranteed reach, there is a need to carry out the careful planning that must take into account the seasonality of employment and the demand for work. Now, for example, you must have seen that in case of rural areas, the demand for work is not uniform across the year. Usually, the demand is higher during the lean agricultural season, and the demand for the MG Narega work is quite lower, especially during the harvesting season. So during the harvesting season, the unemployed youths in the rural areas are able to get employment in the agricultural fields, and thus their demand for the MG Narega works reduces. Whereas during the lean agriculture season, the demand for the MG Narega works is higher because they do not have any alternate employment opportunities. So when we plan for the MG Narega work, we must take into account this particular linkage between the seasonality of employment and the demand for work. If we fail to do so, then we will not be able to create the jobs at the right time. Now, taking this guaranteed reach forward, as highlighted before, presently there is an influx of large number of migrants into the rural areas, because of which the households have utilized their complete quota of 100 days of employment. Now we must take into account the economic problems caused due to COVID-19 and accordingly increase the number of guaranteed days of employment to the people in the rural areas to around 150 days. So this amount of flexibility should has to be incorporated into MG Narega program in order to ensure its success as well as guaranteed reach. Now, with respect to guaranteed outcome, some of the experts have raised concerns over the quality of assets that are created under the MG Narega. Now, for example, when we create the check dams as part of the MG Narega, such check dams should be able to function for more than 2 rainy seasons. But normally it is seen that immediately after the rainy season, such kind of check dams are disrupted or non-functional. So, concerns have been raised with respect to quality of assets that are created under MG Narega. The next set of problems are related to the wages. Now, first and foremost, presently the central government notifies the MG Narega wages on an annual basis, whereas the state government notifies the minimum wages for the agriculture workers in the respective states. Now, it has so happened that in some of the states, the MG Narega wages fixed for the central government are much lower than the minimum wages for the agricultural workers. Secondly, ideally the MG Narega wages should be linked to a inflation index. So as this inflation index increases every year, the MG Narega wages should also increase by a similar proportion as well. So the inflation index increases by 5%, the MG Narega wages should also increase by 5%. This would ensure that the workers in the MG Narega are able to meet their livelihood requirements. Now, presently the MG Narega wages are linked to Consumer Price Index Agricultural Labor, which is published by the Labour Bureau. Now, in the DNS video dated 10th of October 2019, I have discussed various facets related to the fixing of the MG Narega wages. For example, I had discussed about how the MG Narega wages are determined, the various inflation indices in India. I had also highlighted that the MG Narega wages are presently linked to the CPI-AL. Further, I have also highlighted as to what are the various problems with respect to linking the MG Narega wages to CPI-AL. For example, I had highlighted that the consumption basket, which is used for measuring CPI-AL, has not been updated since last 3 decades. That is why this inflation index has become outdated. So in order to solve this problem, the government had come up with a proposal to update both Consumer Price Index AL, that is published by the Labour Bureau, and the CPI Rural, which is published by the National Statistical Office. The government then had stated that it will link the MG Narega wages either to the CPI AL or CPI Rural, depending upon which of these two indices is higher. Now, this particular reform so far has not been carried out by the government of India, because of which even today the MG Narega wages continue to remain lower. So those of you who would want to understand about the various aspects related to MG Narega wages, I would ask you to refer to this particular DNS dated 10th of October 2019. The other problems related to payment of wages is the delay in the payment of wages. And lastly, as you must be aware, under the MG Narega program, if a particular person applies for a job and if such a person does not get the employment within next 15 days, then a person is entitled to the unemployment allowance. Now, sadly, in case of India, most of the people who fail to get job under the MG Narega do not get the unemployment allowance. Now, with respect to governance related issues in the MG Narega, first and foremost, there is lack of convergence of MG Narega with other government schemes and programs. Now, for example, under the Jal Jeevan Mission, we are focusing on the watershed development, we are focusing on the rainwater harvesting. So even under the Jal Jeevan Mission, we are constructing the rainwater harvesting structures. So ideally there has to be a convergence between the MG Narega and the Jal Jeevan Mission. Similarly, under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, we are constructing the houses in the rural areas, and ideally there should be a convergence between the MG Narega and Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. So lack of convergence of MG Narega with other government schemes and programs leads to unnecessary duplication of efforts, as well as it leads to problems of coordination. Nextly, presently the Gram Sabha in the respective villages have been empowered to formulate the plans and implement the MG Narega. Now, such a feature of MG Narega program is undoubtedly an improvement over the earlier employment generation programs which lack the people's participation. But under the MG Narega, we must ensure that the Panchayati Raj institutions have the necessary capacity building and the expertise in order to plan and implement the scheme. Nextly, Section 17 of the MG Narega Act provides for the social audit. Now, social audit is different from the financial audit. The main purpose of carrying out the financial audit is to ascertain that the money sanctioned by the government of India is used only for the purpose for which it was sanctioned. On the other hand, the social audit, which is carried out with the active participation of the local people, aims to find the social impact of the government scheme and program. That is, it seeks to ascertain to what extent the government scheme or program has been able to make an impact on the rural society. Now, according to the CAG, social audit has not been carried out in almost around 49% of the Gram Panchayats, which in turn reduces the overall effectiveness of this particular program. So coming to the last dimension, that is how to address the implementation challenges. So obviously, in order to address the implementation challenges, we have to ensure the guaranteed reach, guaranteed outcome. We need to solve the problems related to wages, the problems related to governance. Apart from that, some of the suggestions that can be incorporated here are MG Narega can be used as a probable indicator of rural distress, expansion of works under the MG Narega, upskilling of the MG Narega workers. Now, these suggestions have been taken from the Economic Survey 2018-19. Now, with respect to first suggestion, that is using the MG Narega as an indicator of rural distress. Now, we are normally seeing that if the distress in a particular rural area increases, then automatically the demand for the MG Narega work also increases. So in a way, the demand for the MG Narega work is an indicator of rural distress. Now, for example, if the demand for the MG Narega work in a particular rural area located within a state increases, then this would mean that such a rural area is facing the distress. So the Economic Survey had highlighted that the government of India should keep on monitoring the demand for the MG Narega work, and if there is a sudden surge in the MG Narega work, then the government should construe this as the rural distress in a particular region of a country and accordingly take appropriate policy measures in order to reduce the localized rural distress. The next suggestion is with respect to expansion of works under the MG Narega. Now, presently under the MG Narega, certain permissible works are carried out. One among them is to strengthen the water conservation mission. Now, the Economic Survey has highlighted that we need to include desilting of canals and water bodies as one of the permissible works under the MG Narega in order to strengthen the water conservation mission. The last suggestion is with respect to upskilling of the MG Narega workers, wherein it has been highlighted that there is a need to have a greater amount of convergence between the MG Narega and Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushalya Yojana. As part of such a convergence, we need to focus on skilling the MG Narega workers, and this would in turn lead to the diversification of their livelihoods. So these are some of the important aspects which you should know with respect to this particular article. Now the next article appears on page number 1 and is titled as the Opium Cheeses India in the Top 5 list. The article that we are going to discuss here shall be important with respect to GS Paper 3 Internal Security under the subsection Security Challenges and the Management in the Border Areas, Linkages of Organized Crime with the Terrorism. Now, according to recently published World Drug Report by the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs and Crime, India has emerged as the hub of not only the conventional opium-based drugs, but it has also emerged as the epicenter of the illicit synthetic drugs. Now, in our DNS dated 27th of June 2020, we have discussed the highlights of this particular report as well as certain basic details related to the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs as well as Crime. Now, in this particular DNS video, we shall be discussing various aspects related to the drug trafficking, such as what factors have led to the surge in drug trafficking within India, how drug trafficking poses the internal security challenges, and what steps the government has taken in order to stop this menace. Now, based upon our video discussion, a main practice question for you here would be discuss as to how the drug trafficking has emerged as a major challenge to India's internal security. Also highlight various steps taken by the government to stop this menace. Now, coming to the first dimension of the reasons for the increase for the drug trafficking in India. See, one of the biggest reasons for the increase in the drug trafficking in India is its proximity to the Golden Crescent area and the Golden Triangle area. Now, if you look at the Golden Crescent area, this basically comprises of Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, this is a major area of production of both hashish as well as heroin. Now, heroin and hashish from this particular region is in turn trafficked into India in various border states such as Gujarat, Rajasthan, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, etc. Almost around 40% of all the heroin that is seized in India is actually from this Golden Crescent area. Further, towards the east, we have the Golden Triangle area, which comprises of the countries such as Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam and Thailand. Traditionally, the heroin produced in this particular Golden Triangle, particularly Myanmar, finds its way through the Indo-Myanmar border into the northeastern states. This is quite rampant in some of the northeastern states such as Mizoram, Manipur as well as Nagaland. Now, one of the main reasons for the drug trafficking in this particular area can be attributed to the political instability, the various insurgent groups which are operating in the northeastern states, the porous border which exists between India and Myanmar. So because of these reasons, there is inflow of the illicit drugs into the northeastern states of India. Now, this particular drug trafficking in India in turn poses multifaceted internal security challenges. The first internal security challenge is with respect to terror financing. Now, there exists a close nexus between the drug traffickers and the terrorists. In some of the cases, the terrorists have used the proceeds of the sale of the illicit drugs for the terror financing. Now, according to a study which was carried out in the year 2012, almost around 15% of the finances of the militants operating in J&K was basically generated through the drugs. Similarly, the drug trafficking has emerged as a major source of funding for various insurgent groups which are operating in the northeastern part of India. Thirdly, we must understand that the drug trafficking is considered to be a precursor to the arms trafficking. This is so because the routes which are traditionally used, tried and tested by the drug traffickers are in turn used for smuggling of weapons into India. For example, according to intelligence agencies, the arms and explosives that were used in the 1993 Syria bomb blast as well as the recent Pathankot bomb blast of 2015 were actually transported through the traditional drug trafficking routes. So this shows that the tried and tested routes used for the drug traffickers are now presently used for trafficking of the illegal weapons into India. And lastly, the drug trafficking in turn ensures easy access to the illegal drugs across the country, particularly in the border states, which in turn leads to the law and order problem as well as the criminal activities. Now, keeping in mind various security challenges posed by the drug trafficking, the government of India has adopted the multifaceted approach involving legislative measures, surveillance measures, and the cooperation with the neighboring countries. With respect to legislative measures, The government of India has enacted the Narcotic Drugs and the Psychotropic Substances Act 1985. This particular act prohibits the cultivation, manufacturing, transportation, export and import of all the narcotic drugs and the psychotropic substances except for the medical use. Similarly, the government has enacted the Customs Act 1962, which has provisions for curbing the illicit export of the chemicals that are likely to be used for the manufacture of the narcotic drugs. For example, some of the drugs such as ketamine, ephedrine can be used for the manufacturing of narcotic drugs, and accordingly, under the Customs Act, prohibitions have been imposed on the export of such chemicals. Secondly, almost around 70% of the illicit drug trafficking happens through the land route, and thus India has enhanced the surveillance of the border areas, including the border fencing. Coming to the last step, that is the cooperation with the neighboring countries, the government of India has signed a bilateral agreement with some of the countries such as Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Myanmar, Pakistan, etc., in order to facilitate smooth exchange of information regarding the joint investigation of the drug trafficking. Similarly, India has also signed the SAARC Convention on the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances that has regular exchanges between the Home Ministers and the Home Secretaries of the member countries. And lastly, Government of India has also signed the BIMSTEC Convention on Cooperation in Combating International Terrorism, Transnational Organized Crime and Illicit Drug Trafficking in order to promote cooperation among the BIMSTEC countries to stop the menace of the drug trafficking. Now, these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 15 and is titled as Government Reviewing 50 Investment Proposals from the Chinese Firms. The article that we are going to discuss here shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection Current Events of National Importance as well as Indian Economy. Apart from that, this particular topic is also important because a rated question on the difference between the foreign direct investment and the foreign institutional investment was already asked in prelims 2011. Now, the recent outbreak of the COVID-19 has led to the decrease in the share prices of the Indian companies. So this particular decrease in the share prices of the Indian companies has in turn exposed them to the opportunistic and hostile takeover by the Chinese companies. Hence, in order to prevent the takeover of the Indian companies by the Chinese companies through the foreign direct investment route, recently the government of India has made certain crucial and significant changes to the FDI policy. Now, as you all must be aware, the FDI can come into India either under the government route or the automatic route. Now, the government of India has clearly mentioned as to which particular route would be applicable for which particular sector. For example, for some of the critical sectors such as the public sector bank or the print media, here the government route is applicable. However, for other sectors such as the coal mining, FDI in airports, FDI in telecommunication, etc., here the automatic route is applicable. Now, as per the earlier regime, irrespective whether the FDI is allowed under the government route or the approval route, if the FDI was coming from either Pakistan or Bangladesh, compulsorily such FDI was subjected to the government route. So if the FDI comes from Pakistan or Bangladesh for the sectors which are presently under the automatic route, even then the government approval would be needed. Now, in response to the concerns raised over the hostile takeover of the Indian companies by the Chinese companies, the government has made certain fundamental changes. Now, as per the new consolidated FDI policy, if the FDI comes from any of the country with which India shares a land boundary, then the FDI from such country would compulsorily be subjected to the government route. So earlier, this provision was applicable only to Pakistan and Bangladesh. Now, this provision has been made applicable to the FDI from all the countries with which India shares a land boundary. This, in a way, seeks to target the Chinese companies. Now, this first provision is with respect to the new FDI that can come into India. Apart from that, there could be a possibility that a particular foreign company that owns certain percentage of ownership in an Indian company, such a foreign company can transfer its ownership to another foreign company that may be based in China. So here a particular Chinese company could be the beneficiary in the transfer of the ownership of an Indian company from one particular foreign company to another foreign company. Hence, once again, in order to prevent such kind of transfer of ownership from one foreign company to a Chinese company, now the government has stated that in case of the transfer of ownership, if the ownership is getting transferred to a company that is based in a country with which India has a land boundary, then even for such transfer of ownership, the government approval is needed. Now, this particular change in the FDI policy of the government of India must not be viewed in isolation. This must be viewed as a part of the comprehensive policy of the government of India for the economic boycott of China. Now, this particular article highlights that presently the government of India is reviewing almost around 50 investment proposals from the Chinese firms. And as stated before, if the FDI is coming from China, then irrespective of which sector it is investing in, compulsorily government approval is needed for such investment. So now the government of India is reviewing the investment proposals. Now, keeping this article in mind, let us understand certain fundamental details related to the foreign direct investment. So basically, the foreign investment that comes into India can be categorized either as a foreign direct investment or the foreign portfolio investment. If a foreign company is establishing its base in India, if it is bringing in its foreign technology and managerial expertise, then we can call such kind of foreign investment as the foreign direct investment. On the other hand, if a foreign company is merely buying the financial instruments such as the shares issued by the Indian company, then such kind of foreign investment can be categorized as the foreign portfolio investment. In order to better delineate the difference between the FDI and FPI, earlier the government of India had appointed a committee under the leadership of Arvind Mayaram. Now, this particular committee has given recommendations as to on what basis we must distinguish the foreign investment either as FDI or FPI, and such a recommendation has been accepted. Now, according to the government of India, if the foreign company is making an investment of 10% or more in a listed Indian company. The listed Indian company here means a company that is listed on the stock exchange. So, if the foreign company is making an investment of 10% or more in a listed Indian company, then it is treated as the foreign direct investment. On the other hand, if the investment is less than 10%, then it is treated as a foreign portfolio investment. So the basic difference between FDI and FPI is based upon the percentage of ownership in an Indian company. With respect to unlisted Indian company, that is a company that is not listed on the stock exchange, please do note here that irrespective of the investment made by a foreign company in an unlisted Indian company, such kind of investment shall always be treated as the foreign direct investment. So let's say a particular foreign company makes an investment of 2% in an unlisted Indian company. Here, this will not be treated as FPI. Rather, it will be treated as FDI simply because the investment has been made in an unlisted Indian company. Had this investment made in a listed company, then it would have been treated as a foreign portfolio investment. Now, as stated before, the FDI can come into India either under the government route or the automatic route. Earlier, we had a separate route known as the approval route, under which the foreign company was required to take the prior approval of the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. However, this approval route has now got replaced by the government route. As part of the government route, the foreign direct investment is required to make an application in the Foreign Investment Facilitation Portal From this particular portal, the application goes to the concerned ministry or department. For example, if there is a FDI proposal related to the mining, then it will go to the Ministry of Mines. If there is an FDI proposal related to print media, it will go to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And apart from that, if the FDI is coming from Pakistan and Bangladesh, a separate security clearance has to be taken from Home Ministry. Further, as per the FDI consolidation policy of the Government of India, FDI proposals of more than 5,000 crores have to be compulsorily approved by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. As far as the automatic route is concerned, as the name suggests, there is no need for the prior approval of either the government or the RBI. Now, with respect to the sectors wherein the FDI is prohibited, now the sectors where the FDI is prohibited include the lottery business, gambling and betting, including the casinos, chit funds and nidhi companies, trading in transferable development rights, real estate business or the construction of the farmhouses. Now, if you look at the real estate business in case of India, this could be categorized as two types. The first type could be with respect to real estate companies who are involved in the construction of the commercial as well as residential properties. Apart from that, in case of real estate, we can also have companies who are basically involved in buying and selling of land. Now, as far as the FDI in real estate is concerned, the FDI is allowed only in the construction of the commercial property, townships, residential properties and so on. And FDI is presently not allowed with respect to buying and selling of land. Further, FDI is also not allowed in manufacturing of cigars, sectors which are not open for the private sector investment, such as the atomic energy, railway operations. Now, please do note that the FDI is not completely prohibited in the railway operations. There are some activities under the railways which are opened up for the foreign direct investment. Some of these activities include the construction of the dedicated freight corridor, the public-private partnership in the Indian Railways, the construction of the high-speed railway projects, the construction of the metro projects and so on. So in a way, the FDI is not completely prohibited in the railway operations. Now the FDI as such can be categorized as either the Greenfield FDI or the Brownfield FDI. Now the Greenfield FDI corresponds to the new FDI that can come into India, wherein the foreign company is establishing its operations either on its own or in association with the Indian company. So it's altogether a new FDI that is coming into India. As far as a Brownfield FDI is concerned, the foreign company is merely taking over the ownership of the Indian company. Now this kind of FDI we call it as a Brownfield FDI. So in recent times we have seen that a large number of Indian pharmaceutical companies have been taken over by the foreign companies, and such kind of FDI is considered as a Brownfield FDI. Now some of the important pointers for the prelims examination here include, first and foremost, the countries that attract the highest FDI include USA, China, Singapore. As far as India is concerned, India has been placed at the 10th position. Now the top FDI sources for India in the year 2019-20 were Singapore, Mauritius, Netherlands, USA and Japan. Now the top FDI source for India between the years 2000 to 2019 in terms of cumulative value, here the topmost country was Mauritius, followed by Singapore. And the sectors that have been attracting the highest amount of FDI include services, computer software and hardware, as well as telecommunications. Now this is both in terms of cumulative value, that is between the years 2000 to 2019, as well as in the financial year 2019-20. Now coming back to the question that was asked in prelims 2011, the question here was, both foreign direct investment and foreign institutional investor are related to investment in a country. Which among the following statements best represents an important difference between the two? Please do note that now the definition of the foreign institutional investor has been replaced by the foreign portfolio investor. Now, if you look at the options which are given here, the first option is actually wrong, because this says that the foreign institutional investor helps bring better management skills and technology Rather, it is FDI that helps bring better management skills and technology. Similarly, if you look at the option C, it says FDI flows only into the secondary market while FII targets the primary market. Now, the foreign institutional investment can target both the primary market as well as the secondary market. So once again, this option here is wrong. Option D says FII is considered to be more stable than FDI. Even this option is wrong because FII is considered to be unstable because it is mainly short term in nature. That is why we also refer to the foreign portfolio investment as hot money as well. This is because the FPI inflows and outflows are considered to be highly volatile. So the closest answer to our question here would be B. That is, FII helps in increasing the capital availability in general while FDI only targets the specific sectors. Now this particular article appears on page number 7. Recently on June 29th, we celebrated the 125th birth anniversary of P.C. Mahalanobis. It is behind this particular backdrop this article has appeared in the newspaper. Let us understand the contribution of P.C. Mahalanobis from the prelims perspective. Now, P.C. Mahalanobis founded the Indian Statistical Institute in the year 1931. That is why he is also referred to as the father of Indian statistics. He was also instrumental in setting the National Sample Survey in the year 1950 and the Central Statistical Organization in the year 1951. As you must be aware now, the National Sample Survey Organization and the Central Statistical Organization have merged together in order to form the National Statistical Office. Now, one of the biggest contribution of P.C. Mahalanobis was towards India's planning. India embarked on 5-year planning after its independence. Now, P.C. Mahalanobis is considered to be chief architect of India's second 5-year plan. Now, one of the main features of second 5-year plan pursued by the Indian government was the focus upon the rapid industrialization. Now, this is quite important because if you look at the first 5-year plan formulated by the Indian government and implemented for the time duration 1951 to 1956, this first 5-year plan basically focused on agriculture as well as irrigation. On the other hand, under the second 5-year plan, we focus upon the heavy industrialization, because of which as part of the second 5-year plan, huge amount of money was invested in certain heavy industries, particularly with respect to development of iron and steel industries, development of electricity, railways, machineries, communications, and so on. Apart from that, as part of the second 5-year plan, we also focus upon import substitution. As the name suggests, import substitution means substituting the imports by enhancing the production of the goods within India. Now, because of his contribution to the formulation of India's second 5-year plan, the second 5-year plan of India is also referred to as the Mahalanobis model of development. Now, the last topic appears on page number 5 and is titled as the Rajasthan farmers seek the full procurement of crop at MSP. Now, this particular topic is closely related to the food grain distribution system in India. This topic is quite important because a related question has been asked in UPSC Mains 2019 in GS paper 3. Now, the question which was asked here was, what are the reformative steps taken by the government to make the food grain distribution system more effective? You were required to write the answer to this particular question in 250 words and the marks allocated was 15 marks. Now, last year after the UPSC Mains examination, we had carried out the analysis of the questions that were asked in the UPSC Mains examination. One of the questions that was discussed by us was the question related to the food grain distribution system. Now, in this particular discussion, we had discussed in detail about the various flaws with respect to the food grain distribution system. We had also discussed as to how should you write the answer to this particular question, wherein we had clearly delineated the answer in terms of the introduction, body as well as conclusion. So I suggest you to refer to this particular video in order to comprehensively understand all the aspects related to the food grain distribution system. The link to this particular video has been provided in the description box below. Now coming to the question for the day. The question for the day here is, which among the following can be considered as a foreign direct investment in India? The first statement here is, a foreign company making an investment of 10% or more in a listed Indian company. Statement number 2 is, a foreign company makes investment in unlisted Indian company. Select the correct answer using the code given below. Now with respect to the question which was asked in yesterday's DNS, the question here was, Article 265 of the Indian Constitution states that no tax shall be levied or collected except by authority of law. This can be best understood as, now in case of India, we do have the federal setup, which means that both the center as well as states have the power to impose the taxes, but they can impose and collect taxes only under the authority of the law. This essentially means that the center and states can collect the tax provided the parliament in the case of the center and the state legislature in case of state have formulated a law that imposes the tax. So if you look at the options which are given here, the option A reads, only the center has the power to make the law to levy the tax, which is wrong. Option B says only the state governments have the power to make law to levy tax in India. This is also wrong. Option C says both the center and states has the power to levy the respective tax in their jurisdiction. Undoubtedly, center and states have the power to impose the taxes. However, they can do so only when it is supported by a law passed by either the parliament in case of the center or the state legislature in case of the states. So even option C here is wrong. So the answer we are left with is D. That is none of the above.